The janitor continued to care for the abandoned elderly man despite his heart attack. When the old man died in his arms and he read the will, he couldn't believe what he had just discovered. Charles Sullivan's heart pounded as he raced up the stairs of Pinewood Gardens. The elevator would take too long and every second counted. He ignored the sharp pain in his chest, focusing only on reaching the 5th floor before it was too late. Through the stairwell window, he caught glimpses of gathering neighbors on the sidewalk below, pointing upward. Their voices echoed up. "Someone's going to jump." He burst onto the 5th floor, his lungs burning. Professor Gerald Harrison stood at his apartment window, 1 foot on the ledge, muttering equations into the wind. The old man's gray hair whipped around his face as he swayed dangerously. "Professor?" Charles called out, keeping his voice steady despite his racing pulse. "Step back inside." Gerald turned, his eyes wild but somehow lucid. "They're coming for me, Charles. They'll silence me before I remember everything." Charles took a careful step forward. "Let me help you. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it." "The theorem," Gerald's voice cracked. "They stole it. Robert, he took everything." Another step. Charles was close enough now to smell coffee on Gerald's breath. The professor's hands trembled as they gripped the window frame. "Your son, Robert?" Charles asked, inching closer. "Tell me about it inside." Gerald laughed bitterly. "Not my son. Never was. All lies." Charles saw his chance as Gerald turned to speak. He lunged forward, wrapping his arms around the older man's waist and pulling him back from the window. They both fell to the floor as neighbors applauded from below. Gerald grabbed Charles's arm with surprising strength. "They killed him too, my brother." Before Charles could respond, Victoria Palmer, the building manager, burst in with security. Her heels clicked against the floor as she took control of the situation. "Professor Harrison needs rest," she announced, her voice clipped. "Charles, my office, now." 3 months earlier, Charles had noticed the first signs. Gerald, once sharp and precise, began forgetting simple things. The brilliant mathematician who'd taught at MIT for 40 years started getting lost between floors. Charles watched it all during his daily rounds, just as he'd watched the lives of Pinewood Gardens residents for 20 years. He noticed when Jessica, Gerald's caregiver, started leaving medications untouched in the trash. He saw the Genesis development letters arriving for elderly residents, followed by Victoria's closed-door meetings. At home in his basement apartment, Charles stared at Sarah's photo beside his bed. His late wife smiled back, holding Max, the aging golden retriever, who now rested his gray muzzle on Charles's knee. "What would you do, Sarah?" he whispered, remembering her final days. The argument with their son Michael still echoed. "You could have sold the house for better treatment." A bark from Max interrupted his thoughts. The dog padded to the door, where an envelope had been slipped underneath. Inside, Charles found an old photograph. Sarah standing beside a younger Gerald Harrison, both smiling at some long-ago university event. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, "She knew too much. You're the only one I can trust now." Victoria's voice crackled over his radio. "Charles, cleanup needed on 5. He tucked the photo away and grabbed his cart, feeling the weight of 20 years of service pressing down on him. As he rode the elevator up, he couldn't shake Gerald's words from earlier. "They killed him too. My brother." The doors opened to the 5th floor, where another piece of the puzzle waited to be discovered. Charles found the first diary while emptying Professor Harrison's trash. The notebook should have caught his attention. Leather-bound and filled with equations, but something else made him pause. A photo slipping from between its pages. Victoria Palmer, 30 years younger, standing next to Gerald at a graduation ceremony. He pocketed both items and continued his rounds, but his chest tightened with each step. By the time he reached the basement, the pain forced him to sit. Through the window of his apartment, he saw Emily Harrison, the professor's teenage granddaughter, entering the building. "The derivative is wrong," she said, finding him in the maintenance room an hour later. She held Gerald's notebook open to a complex equation. "Someone changed these numbers." "You understand this?" Charles asked. "Grandpa taught me. This is his theory on predictive algorithms, but someone altered key variables." She pointed to several crossed-out sections. "The published version is wrong." The maintenance radio crackled. "Charles, medications spill in 5C. Jessica's voice announced. He found Gerald's caregiver replacing pills in the bathroom cabinet. She jumped at his entrance, dropping several tablets. As Charles helped her clean up, he noticed the pills didn't match the labels. Mr. Sullivan. Eleanor Thompson's voice made him turn. She stood in the doorway, scrutinizing the scene. Interesting to find you here again. Back in his apartment, Charles reviewed Gerald's diary. Names and dates jumped out. Robert Harrison, Genesis Development, Project Phoenix. His chest pain returned as he read Sarah's name on a page dated just before her death. The security camera feed on his maintenance monitor showed Victoria entering Gerald's apartment. She emerged with a file folder, then made a call. It's handled. The old man won't remember. Emily texted him at midnight. Found something in Grandpa's computer. Need to show you. Charles met her in the lobby. She opened her laptop to display complex financial records. These prove Dad stole Grandpa's work. The Genesis contract is worth billions. A sharp pain shot through Charles's left arm. He steadied himself against the wall as footsteps approached. Mr. Sullivan. Eleanor Thompson again. We need to discuss your unusual interest in the Harrison family. Before he could respond, Victoria's voice came over the intercom. Emergency meeting for all maintenance staff, basement level. In Victoria's office, she slapped a formal warning letter on her desk. Your involvement with residents must stop. Final warning. Like your involvement with Gerald years ago, Charles placed the graduation photo on her desk. Victoria's face paled. Where did you? Found something else too. He showed her the diary entry about Robert. He's not Gerald's son, is he? She snatched the diary. You're fired. No. Emily's voice came from the doorway. She held up her phone, recording. He's not, and I can prove it. Charles's chest seized again. Through the pain, he saw Jessica watching from the hallway, speaking into her phone. We have a problem. That night, checking the cameras one last time, spotted Gerald at his window again. But something else caught his eye. Eleanor Thompson entering the building with a file marked Harrison Genesis Investigation. The elevator opened behind him. Charles turned to find Robert Harrison stepping out. My father's become quite fond of you, Robert said. That needs to end. Charles clutched his chest as Robert smiled. Oh, and those heart problems you're having? Shame about the medication mix-up. Before Charles could respond, a scream echoed from the 5th floor. Gerald had found something, or remembered something, he wasn't supposed to. Charles found Gerald sitting on his bathroom floor, holding a bottle of pills. The professor looked up with tear-filled eyes. I remember everything now. Put the pills down, Charles said, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. They stole my life's work, killed my brother, and Robert. Gerald's hand shook. Robert isn't even mine. A security alert flashed on Charles's radio, unauthorized access to the building's west entrance. He ignored it, focusing on Gerald. Your work can still matter, Charles said. Emily understands the equations. Gerald's eyes cleared slightly. Emily? Yes. She's brilliant, like her grandmother. He lowered the pills. There's something you need to see. In Gerald's study, hidden behind a loose panel, they found a stack of documents. Original equations, legal papers, and letters spanning decades. Charles's chest tightened as he saw Sarah's signature on one of them. Your wife was investigating Genesis, Gerald explained. She found inconsistencies in their financials. The building's security system beeped, indicating another breach. Charles's radio crackled with Victoria's voice. All personnel, unauthorized access on multiple floors. They're coming, Gerald whispered. Quick, take these. He shoved a USB drive and several papers into Charles's hands. Everything's here. The original theorem, proof of theft, and the apartment door burst open. Robert Harrison stood there with 2 men in suits. Dad, you're confused again, Robert said smoothly. Time for your medication. Charles stepped between them. He's not confused. Mr. Sullivan, Robert smiled, you're fired. Security will escort you out. Not your father, Gerald said suddenly. Tell him, Victoria. Victoria Palmer appeared in the doorway, face pale. Gerald, please. Tell him, Gerald shouted. Tell him how his real father died. One of Robert's men moved toward Gerald. Charles intercepted him, but the second man grabbed Charles from behind. Pain shot through his chest at the sudden movement. Stop. Eleanor Thompson's voice cut through the chaos. She stood in the hallway, phone raised. Everything's being recorded. Robert laughed. Mrs. Thompson, still playing detective? Federal witness, Eleanor corrected. Just like Sarah Sullivan was. The room froze. Charles stared at Eleanor as pieces clicked into place. Sarah found the fraud, Eleanor continued. She was going to testify about Genesis, about the stolen theorem, about Robert's real father. Lying bit. Robert lunged at Eleanor. Charles tackled him despite his chest pain. They crashed into Gerald's desk. Papers flew everywhere. Victoria screamed, "James is alive!" Everyone stopped. Gerald grabbed the desk for support. "My brother, witness protection," Victoria said, tears streaming. "I've known for a year. Genesis found him." Robert's men released Charles and reached for their phones. Robert scrambled to his feet. "Clean this up, now." "Already done." Emily's voice came from Gerald's computer speakers. "Live streaming to MIT's servers. Dad, you're done." But Robert smiled. "Check your grandfather's pills, genius." "Oops." Gerald collapsed. As Charles caught him, his own heart seized. 2 problems solved. Robert headed for the door. "Victoria, finish it." Instead, Victoria pulled out her phone. "James, they're making their move. Execute Protocol Phoenix." Charles fought through his pain to check Gerald's pulse. Eleanor called 911 while Emily ran for the building's defibrillator. "Why?" Charles managed to ask Victoria. "James was my professor too," she said. "Before Robert's real father killed him, or thought he did. I've been undercover since Gerald hired me." "Sarah?" Charles wheezed. "She discovered the truth. I tried to warn her, but..." Victoria choked. "I failed her. I won't fail Gerald." Paramedics rushed in. As they worked on Gerald, Charles's vision blurred. The last thing he saw was Eleanor reaching for his hand. He woke in the hospital to find Emily sitting beside him, laptop open. "Grandpa's stable," she said before he could ask. "Victoria's testifying. Dad's disappeared. But look what I found in the live stream comments." She turned the screen. There was a message. "Protocol Phoenix active. JH. James Harrison is really alive," Emily whispered, "and he's coming home." Charles touched his chest, feeling the bandages from his emergency stent placement. A text lit up his phone. "Got your son. Safe with me. Time to finish what Sarah started." Eleanor appeared in the doorway. "Ready to hear the whole story?" Charles nodded, thinking of Sarah's last words. "Don't stop caring." Looking at Emily's determined face, Eleanor's gentle smile, and the message from James, he knew Sarah would be proud. His heart might be damaged, but it still knew what was right. "Tell me everything," he said. The hospital recovery room transformed into an impromptu command center. Peggy O'Brien arrived first, closing the door behind her. "We need to move quickly," she said, revealing a badge. "FBI, retired. I've been watching Genesis for years." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "The quiet nurse from 3C? Best cover for surveillance." Peggy connected her laptop to the hospital's Wi-Fi. "Victoria's testimony starts in an hour." Charles tried to sit up, fighting against the tubes and monitors. "Michael, your son is safe," Peggy assured him. "James Harrison has him at a secure location." Emily burst in, clutching her backpack. "They're erasing everything. Dad's people are wiping servers." "Not everything." Peggy smiled, turning her laptop to show multiple backup files. "Genesis doesn't know about Sarah's cloud drive." Charles's heart monitor spiked. "Sarah had proof?" "She encrypted everything," Eleanor explained. "We couldn't access it without Gerald's theorem. That's why they..." She stopped, glancing at Charles. "Why they killed her," he finished. The monitor beeped faster. A knock interrupted them. Jessica, Gerald's former caregiver, entered with a USB drive. "Robert hired me to spy," she admitted, "but I copied everything." Peggy checked the files. Payment records, shell companies, the original theorem. And this. Jessica pulled up a video. Gerald appeared on screen, younger, next to a man who looked identical. "The Harrison twins," Eleanor whispered. "The day before James died." Charles's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Genesis board meeting, 1 hour, bringing everything down." Emily worked on her laptop, brow furrowed. "Grandpa's theorem, it's not just about market prediction. It's a key." "To what?" Charles asked. "Everything." She pointed to patterns in the code. Banking systems, security networks, power grids. With these equations, you could control it all. The hospital room door opened again. Michael stood there, looking exactly like the last time Charles had seen him 5 years ago. "Dad." Michael stepped forward. "I'm sorry, I found Mom's notes." Charles stared at his son. The monitors recorded his heart's erratic response. "She left instructions," Michael continued. "If anything happened to her, we were supposed to find James Harrison, but I blamed you instead." Before Charles could respond, Gerald was wheeled in by a nurse. Despite his weakened state, his eyes were alert. "James is here," he announced. "Protocol Phoenix is ready." Peggy's laptop pinged with an incoming message. A video feed showed the Genesis boardroom. Victoria stood at the head of the table, Robert's father's portrait behind her. "Gentlemen," she addressed the board, "let me introduce you to James Harrison." The portrait swung open. A man identical to Gerald stepped out. Robert burst into the room. "Security." "Your security's been relieved," James said. "Hello, son. We need to talk about your real father." The feed cut off. Emily's laptop chimed with incoming data. "The theorem's unlocking everything," she reported. "Bank transfers, offshore accounts, blackmail files." "Sarah found the pattern," Eleanor explained to Charles. "The money laundering, the fake identities. But she needed proof. So she contacted me," James added, appearing in the doorway. "But Robert's father got to her first." Charles's monitors went wild. A nurse rushed in with a sedative. "Rest," Peggy ordered. "We'll handle this." "No," Charles pulled out his IV. "Sarah trusted all of you. I need to see this through." Michael supported his father as he stood. "We'll do it together." Emily's laptop erupted with alerts. Genesis stocks are crashing. Global trading algorithms failing. "The theorem in reverse," Gerald explained proudly. "Destroying everything they built with my stolen work." Eleanor's phone rang. "Victoria's done. Robert's in custody," the board's confessing. "And his real father?" Charles asked. "Found in Cyprus," James replied. "Interpol's moving in." Suddenly, the hospital lights flickered. Emergency systems activated. "They're trying to shut down the power grid," Emily warned. "Last resort protocol." "Can they?" Charles asked. "Not anymore." Emily typed frantically. "Grandpa, that sequence you taught me last summer?" Gerald smiled. "The failsafe, use it." Emily's fingers flew over the keyboard. The light stabilized. "It's over," Peggy confirmed, checking her feeds. "Genesis is finished." Charles sank back onto the bed, exhausted. Michael squeezed his hand. "Mom would be proud," his son said softly. "There's more," James added. "Sarah left something for you both, when you're stronger." The nurse returned, insistent about rest. As the others filed out, Eleanor lingered. "We have work to do," she said. "The residents need protection. Genesis had plans for the building." "Peggy's already organizing," Gerald called from his wheelchair. "Emergency resident meeting tonight." "Rest first," Eleanor told Charles. "I'll handle the meeting." As his eyes closed, Charles heard Emily explaining to Michael about the theorem's true power. His son's voice carried notes of amazement and regret. The monitors settled into a steady rhythm as Charles drifted off. Sarah's last message finally making sense. The truth needs a guardian. Find James, trust Eleanor, protect Gerald, love Michael. The answers are in the numbers. She'd known, she'd planned, and now, 5 years later, her pieces were finally in place. In his dream, she smiled at him. "You did it," she said. "You kept caring." Charles read Sarah's autopsy report in his hospital room, his hands shaking. Cause of death, natural causes had been checked, but Peggy's investigation revealed the truth. Targeted poisoning designed to mimic cancer progression. "They modified her chemotherapy," Eleanor explained, sitting beside his bed. "Robert's father ordered it when she got too close." The heart monitor's steady beep increased. Michael, who hadn't left his father's side since the revelation, gripped the bed rail. "Mom knew," he said. "Her last letter to me, she wrote about insurance policies and safety deposit boxes. I thought she was just being practical." A commotion outside interrupted them. Gerald was arguing with his nurses, trying to leave his room. "I have to stop him," he shouted. "He'll do it again." Emily ran to her grandfather. "Dad's in custody, remember? Not Robert." Gerald fought against the restraints. "James, he's going to expose everything too fast. The system will collapse." Charles's phone lit up with an urgent message from Victoria. "James initiating full server dump. Global markets will crash. Can't stop him." Peggy burst in. "Genesis fail-safes activated. They're burning everything." Emily jumped to her laptop. "They're deleting the proof of Mom's murder," Michael said, watching the screens. "No," Eleanor pulled out a flash drive. "Sarah gave me a copy, in case they found the others." Gerald suddenly went still. "The roof," he whispered. "I remember now. James isn't here to help. He's finishing what he started." Charles tried to stand, but his legs buckled. The heart monitor screamed. "Dad, don't," Michael supported him. "Your heart." "Sarah knew," Charles gasped. "Check her old office. Third drawer. Eleanor rushed out while Peggy made calls. Emily's laptop showed security feeds of James Harrison entering the Pinewood Gardens building. He's heading to the server room, she reported, uploading something. Gerald fought harder against his restraints. It's not the theorem, it's its opposite. Destruction code. Victoria called Charles. James plans to destroy more than Genesis, the whole financial system, his revenge for what they did to him. And Gerald? Charles asked. Collateral damage, always was. Eleanor returned with a file from Sarah's office. Inside, they found photos of James meeting with Robert's father years ago. He was working with them, Michael realized, until they betrayed him too. Charles's monitors stabilized as a new clarity hit him. Sarah discovered both sides were corrupt. The theorem was never meant to be used, Gerald said quietly. I created it to prove it could be done, to warn people. Emily's laptop pinged. Grandpa, the hospital's systems. James is testing his kill switch, Peggy confirmed. We have 10 minutes before it goes global. Charles pulled out his IVs despite the nurses' protests. Get me to Pinewood Gardens. I'm driving, Michael said. They rushed through the hospital corridors, Eleanor and Emily supporting Charles while Peggy cleared their way. Victoria, Charles spoke into his phone. Delay him. Gerald's life support systems will fail if the power goes. Already on it. But Charles, there's something else. About Sarah's last day. The hospital lights flickered. Emergency generators kicked in. Tell me in person, Charles said. Keep James busy. In the car, Emily worked frantically on her laptop. Converting Grandpa's theorem into an antivirus. If I can upload it before James's program fully deploys. Michael ran red lights while Eleanor made calls to evacuate Pinewood Gardens. Charles's phone buzzed with a message from James. She begged for your life, you know. Traded her silence for your survival. Time to finish what she interrupted. Almost there, Michael said, but Charles barely heard him. The truth hit like a physical blow. Sarah hadn't just discovered the fraud, she'd stopped James's first attempt at global financial destruction. Saved Charles instead of herself. Pinewood Gardens loomed ahead, its upper floors dark. Victoria waited at the entrance. James disabled the elevators, she reported. Server rooms on 12. Charles looked at the emergency stairs, then at his chest. Eleanor grabbed his hand. Together, she said. They started climbing while Emily directed them through her laptop comlink. Each floor felt like a mountain. 6 minutes, Peggy updated them. Hospital systems failing across the city. Floor 8, Charles's chest burned. 4 minutes. Power grids fluctuating. Floor 10, Michael practically carried his father. 2 minutes. Banking systems going dark. Floor 12. The server room door stood open. James waited inside, looking exactly like his brother. Hello, Charles, he said. Sarah would be disappointed you didn't let me finish this years ago. She'd be disappointed you became what you fought against, Charles replied. James smiled sadly. We all become our enemies eventually, even you, protecting the system that killed her. No, Eleanor stepped forward. He's protecting what Sarah really died for. Hope. Emily's voice came through the laptop. Antivirus uploading, 1 minute. Doesn't matter, James moved to stop her program. Nothing can... The power died. Everything went black. In the darkness, a single screen glowed. Gerald's face appeared. Hello, brother, he said. Emily, now. The lights surged back. James lunged for the servers, but Michael tackled him. For Mom, he said, and knocked James unconscious. Emily's program finished uploading as Peggy's team arrived. The city's lights stabilized. Charles slid down the wall, chest tight but heart steady. Eleanor sat beside him. Sarah would be proud, she said softly. Victoria appeared with Gerald in a wheelchair. The brothers looked at each other for the first time in decades. I'm sorry, James whispered before being led away. Charles watched his son help the FBI secure the scene, watched Emily explain her solution to her grandfather, watched Eleanor organize the returning residents. His phone lit up one last time. A delayed message from Sarah. If you're reading this, you've found the truth. And more importantly, you've found your family. I love you. P.S. Eleanor's been watching over you for me. Let her in. Charles looked at Eleanor, who was already watching him with understanding eyes. Sometimes he realized the biggest betrayals led to the deepest truths. The discovery of the tunnel changed everything. Charles found it during his first day back at work, behind a loose panel in the basement storage room. The entrance was concealed behind decades of maintenance equipment. "This isn't on any building plans," he told Peggy over his radio. "Don't move," she responded. "Wait for backup." But voices echoed from the darkness. Charles recognized one immediately: Robert Harrison. "The servers are compromised," Robert said. "We need the original drives." Charles pressed against the wall as flashlight beams swept past his hiding spot. His chest tightened, the recent stent procedure still fresh. "Dad?" Michael's whisper made him jump. His son had followed him down. Before Charles could respond, a third voice joined Robert's conversation. "The drives are in the safe, behind the professor's old office." Gerald's voice crackled through Charles's radio. "That's impossible. I sealed that room myself." "Quiet," Peggy commanded. FBI team moving in. The flashlights retreated. Charles and Michael followed at a distance, tracking the voices to a section of wall near Gerald's former MIT office. Emily's text lit up Charles's phone. "Found building schematics in Grandpa's files. Secret room built during Cold War." Robert's group stopped. Metals scraped against concrete. A hidden door swung open. "Charles," Eleanor's voice joined the radio channel. "James is missing from custody." The revelation hit as Charles spotted a familiar figure among Robert's group. James Harrison stood next to his supposed enemy, their conspiracy finally clear. "They were always working together," Michael whispered. Charles's radio crackled again. "Victoria, Genesis board meeting emergency session. They're voting to demolish the building. Now," Peggy ordered. FBI agents swarmed the tunnel. Robert's group scattered, but James stood his ground. "You don't understand," he said as agents surrounded him. "The theorem isn't complete. What Gerald published was wrong." "Because you altered it." Emily emerged from the shadows, laptop glowing. "I found your changes." James laughed. "Gerald altered it first. Ask him about December 12th. Charles's phone buzzed. "Gerald, don't let him reach the safe." Too late. James pulled a device from his pocket. The building's lights flickered. "Backup power engaged," Victoria reported, "but something's wrong with the hospital's systems." Emily's fingers flew across her keyboard. "He's using Grandpa's original code, targeting life support." Charles turned to his son. "Get to Gerald. Now." Michael ran as James raised the device. "One click," he warned. "Every hospital in Boston goes dark." "Why?" Charles stepped forward despite the agent's warnings. "Sarah trusted you." "Sarah was naive. Like Gerald. Some systems need to burn." Eleanor's voice cut through the tension. "Like the system that covered up your wife's death?" James's hand trembled. Charles saw his opening. "Robert's father killed her too," he said. "Same way they killed Sarah." The device lowered slightly. "How did you?" "Sarah found the proof. In your wife's medical records." "Charles," Peggy warned. "Don't." But he continued. "That's why you made the deal with Robert. Revenge on his father, but they betrayed you." James's composure cracked. "Everything I did was for her. I know her. Sarah knew too. That's why she protected you." The device clattered to the floor. James crumpled as agents moved in. "Gerald stabilized," Michael reported over the radio. Emily neutralized the hospital threat. Eleanor appeared at Charles's side. Genesis board meeting in chaos. Victoria's presenting Sarah's evidence. "There's more," James said as agents led him away. "In the safe. The complete theorem, Gerald's original version." Emily accessed the hidden room's security feed. Dad and his people are still in there. "Not for long," Peggy smiled as more agents arrived. Charles watched the FBI breach the secret room. Robert and his associates surrendered quickly, their plan collapsing. "Charles," Victoria's voice was urgent. Genesis chairman confessing everything. About Sarah, about James's wife. But someone else was involved. Gerald's voice shook as he responded. "I know, I remember now. December 12th, the day I chose wrong." "Grandpa?" Emily asked. "The theorem worked too well," Gerald explained. "Predicted market crashes, political falls, everything. They wanted to use it, control everything." "Who?" Charles pressed. "Everyone. Genesis, governments, corporations, so I changed it, made it imperfect." "And James found out," Eleanor concluded. "He wanted to expose it all. I stopped him, chose stability over truth." Charles's chest tightened again, but not from his heart condition. "Sarah discovered both versions." "Yes," Gerald's voice broke. "She died protecting both our secrets." The FBI secured the safe. Inside, they found 2 drives. "The complete theorem," Emily confirmed. "Both versions." "Destroy them," Gerald ordered. "No," Charles said. "Sarah died for the truth, all of it." Eleanor touched his arm. "What are you suggesting?" Release everything, the theorem, the crimes, the cover-ups. Let people decide. The markets will crash, Victoria warned. They'll recover, Peggy said. Truth usually wins. Emily began uploading the files. Michael stood guard. Eleanor held Charles's hand. Sarah would approve, she said softly. As the truth spread across networks worldwide, Charles watched the sun rise through the basement window. Sometimes the deepest conspiracies hid the simplest truths, that people would always choose between comfort and honesty, safety and justice. Sarah had chosen justice. Now he had to. Global markets plunged as Gerald's theorem spread across networks. Charles watched the chaos unfold on the hospital waiting room TV, his own crisis momentarily forgotten. Goldman Sachs down 40%, the anchor reported. Trading halted on major exchanges. Emily burst through the doors. They're trying to shut down the servers, erase everything. Who? Charles asked. Everyone. Banks, tech companies, governments. They're all implicated in Grandpa's predictions. Peggy's team had converted Gerald's old office into a command center. Screens showed failing systems worldwide. 4 hours until total market collapse, she announced as Charles entered, unless we stop the theorem from spreading further. Or let it finish, Eleanor suggested. Release everything. Victoria called from the Genesis Emergency Board meeting. They're voting to liquidate all assets. Robert's allies are destroying evidence. Charles's chest pain returned, sharper this time. The doctor had warned him about stress. Dad? Michael noticed his father's pallor. You need to rest. No time. Charles straightened up. Where's Gerald? Missing, Emily reported, fingers flying over her keyboard. His room's empty. Security footage showed Gerald leaving with James, who had escaped custody during the market chaos. Charles said, remembering Gerald's pattern. When he's overwhelmed, he goes to the roof. The elevator was locked down. Charles faced the stairs, 13 floors up. You can't, Michael protested. Your heart, Sarah's truth is finally out. Charles started climbing. I won't let it end now. Eleanor and Michael followed. Emily coordinated through their phones. Markets in Asia completely frozen, she reported. Europe following. US markets open in 3 hours. Floor 5. Charles's chest burned. Gerald's theorem predicting 70% drop in global GDP, Peggy updated them. Floor 8. Charles stumbled. Michael caught him. Dad, please, keep going. Floor 10. Eleanor supported Charles's other side. 2 hours until US markets open, Emily's voice shook. System-wide failure imminent. Floor 13. The roof access door was open. Gerald stood at the edge, James beside him. Both men turned as Charles emerged. It has to end, James said. All of it. The lies? Charles wheezed. Or the truth? Both, Gerald replied. I never should have created it. The theorem? Eleanor asked. The illusion, Gerald stepped back from the ledge, that we can predict and control everything. James moved closer to his brother. That's why it needs to spread, show everyone the system's a lie. Sarah didn't die for revenge, Charles said. She died protecting people from this exact moment. His heart monitor beeped a warning. Michael steadied him. 1 hour to market open, Emily reported. I can't stop it now. Gerald stared at the city below. The theorem's self-replicating. You can't, Emily agreed, but I can. If you help me. James pulled out a gun. No one's stopping anything. Your wife, Charles gasped through his pain. Would she want this? Don't. James's hand shook. Sarah found something else in the records, Charles continued. About the clinical trial your wife was in. Genesis blocked the real treatment, Eleanor added, to protect their pharmaceutical investments. Show him, Charles told Emily. She pulled up Sarah's encrypted files. Medical records, clinical data, proof of deliberate suppression of life-saving drugs. This is what Sarah was really investigating, Charles said. Not just financial fraud, they killed people for profit. James lowered the gun. Helen could have lived. Yes, Gerald touched his brother's shoulder. That's why I changed the theorem. It predicted everything, including Helen's death if Genesis succeeded. Charles's monitor screamed a warning, his vision blurred. Dad, Michael's voice seemed distant. 30 minutes to market open, Peggy announced. Emily, Charles managed. Sarah's last protocol. She nodded, understanding. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. What are you doing? James demanded. Releasing the truth, she said, but not the theorem, just the crimes. The predictions, James started, were never meant to be weapons, Gerald finished. Help me end this, brother, the right way. Charles's legs gave out. Eleanor caught him as Michael called for medics. "Market's opening in 10 minutes, Victoria reported. James looked at his gun, then at the evidence of his wife's murder. "Helen would want justice," he said finally, "not destruction." He helped Gerald with Emily's code. Together they wrote a kill switch for the theorem while preserving the proof of Genesis's crimes. 2 minutes, Peggy counted down. Charles fought to stay conscious as Emily implemented the changes. "Dad," Michael's voice cracked, "stay with us." 1 minute. Eleanor squeezed Charles's hand. Sarah would be proud. Market's opening. The theorem dissolved, but the truth remained. Screens worldwide filled with evidence of Genesis's decades of crimes. Charles saw James drop his gun, saw Gerald hug his brother, saw Emily's triumph, then his heart seized completely. As consciousness faded, he heard Sarah's voice. "You chose truth over comfort. Now rest." The last thing he felt was Eleanor's hand in his, anchoring him to life as sirens approached in the distance. The emergency room erupted in chaos as Charles was rushed through the doors. The hospital's backup generators strained under the load, lights flickering as equipment struggled to stay online. "Cardiac arrest," the paramedic reported. "Recent stent placement." Eleanor and Michael followed until staff stopped them at the trauma room doors. Through the windows they watched the medical team work. "Clear." The doctor pressed the defibrillator paddles to Charles's chest. Emily's voice came through their phones. Genesis executives trying to flee the country, FBI moving in. "Not now," Michael snapped, eyes fixed on his father. The doctor called out again. "Clear." Down the hall, they brought Gerald in on another stretcher, his own heart failing from the rooftop confrontation. "Both brothers need surgery," Peggy reported from the nurse's station. "But the power." The lights went out completely. Emergency power kicked in seconds later, but machines reset, alarms blaring. "Generators failing," a nurse announced. "We needed to transfer critical patients." "No time," the doctor working on Charles said. "We operate now." Emily texted again. "Hospital targeted, Genesis trying to shut down power grid." Eleanor made a decision. "Michael, stay with your father. Emily, route emergency power from Pinewood Gardens to the hospital." "That'll drain our building's backup," Victoria warned through the group channel. "Do it," Eleanor commanded. In the operating room, doctors worked on Charles while monitoring Gerald in the next room. The brothers' lives hung by the same fragile power supply. James, under FBI supervision, worked with Emily to protect the hospital's systems. 3 minutes of power left, he reported. Market investigations spreading, Victoria updated them. Federal agents at every major bank. "Focus," Eleanor said. "Lives first, justice later." The surgeon called out from Charles's room. "We've got bleeding." Michael pressed against the observation window. "Dad, please." In the adjacent OR, Gerald coded. James watched helplessly as doctors fought to save his brother. 2 minutes of power, Emily warned. Peggy coordinated with FBI teams securing the hospital. Genesis agents in the building, moving to cut main lines. Basement access, Victoria remembered. The tunnel. Eleanor turned to Michael. "Stay here." She ran for the basement, Peggy's agents following. They found Robert's men at the power junction. "Step away," Peggy ordered, weapon raised. "You'll lose everything." Robert's voice came from the shadows. "The theorem, the evidence, your precious patients upstairs." 1 minute of power, Emily reported. Eleanor faced Robert. "Haven't you taken enough lives?" "It's business," he replied. "Always was." Sarah was business? Gerald's life? Charles? Robert's men moved toward the power controls. 30 seconds, Emily counted down. Eleanor saw the choice clearly, like Sarah had, like Charles did. "Now," she signaled. Peggy's teams fired. Non-lethal rounds took down Robert's men. 15 seconds. Robert lunged for the emergency cutoff. 10 seconds. Eleanor tackled him, both crashing into the electrical panel. 5 seconds. Emily's voice, rerouting city grid. "Hold on." The lights surged, then stabilized. Upstairs, the surgical teams called out, bleeding controlled, pulse returning, pressure stabilizing. Michael watched his father's color improve as the crisis passed. Hours later, Charles opened his eyes to find Eleanor in a hospital chair, her arm bandaged from the basement fight. "Gerald?" he whispered. "Stable," she smiled. "James too." Michael appeared with coffee. Emily and Victoria are handling the FBI. Peggy's teams arrested Robert and his entire network. "The theorem? Safe," Eleanor assured him. Emily protected the essential evidence while destroying the predictive code. "Sarah's truth? Front page, every newspaper, all of it. Charles tried to sit up. Eleanor gently pushed him back. Rest, she said. The fighting's over. Not everything, he looked at Michael. We have work to do. His son gripped his hand. Together this time. The door opened. Gerald, in a wheelchair pushed by James, entered. The doctors will be furious we're all here, Gerald said. Let them, James replied. Family belongs together. Charles studied the twins, seeing their shared guilt and grace. Helen would be proud, he told James. Sarah, too. They brought us here, James agreed. Through all the lies, they chose truth. Truth has a price, Gerald added. Worth paying, Eleanor said, touching Charles's hand. Emily texted updates about Genesis arrests, market investigations, exposed corruption. But Charles focused on the faces around him. His son, home at last. Eleanor, strong and certain. The Harrison twins, reunited through tragedy and redemption. Sarah had seen this moment, he realized, had sacrificed everything to make it possible. What now, Michael asked. Charles looked at Eleanor. She smiled, understanding. Now we rebuild, she said, the right way. Together, Gerald agreed. James nodded. For Helen and Sarah. The morning sun broke through the window as Charles closed his eyes, finally at peace. Some sacrifices he knew created foundations for better things. Sarah had taught him that. 1 month after the Genesis collapse, Charles supervised the return of residents to Pinewood Gardens. His doctor had cleared him for light duty, though his chest still ached with certain movements. Third floor inspection complete, he reported through his radio. Copy that. Victoria responded from the lobby. Send up the next group. The building hummed with activity. FBI teams had finished their evidence collection, leaving behind new security systems and reinforced access points. Emily's text lit up his phone. Court-approved resident compensation fund. Genesis assets seized, $50 million for building restoration. Michael appeared with boxes for Gerald's apartment. Dad, you should rest. I'm fine, Charles insisted, but sat down anyway. His recent surgery demanded more recovery time than he wanted to admit. Eleanor joined them, reviewing property documents. Buildings officially transferred to the resident trust. Genesis can't touch it now. Peggy coordinated security from her new office, the former Genesis surveillance room. Perimeter secure, no press allowed inside. The media circus outside had grown since the arrests. Robert's trial dominated headlines, along with the exposed corruption at every level of Genesis operations. Charles. Gerald wheeled himself over. James gave his full testimony this morning. The scope of Genesis's crimes shocked even veteran investigators. Decades of market manipulation, medical trial interference, targeted killings disguised as accidents. Sarah had uncovered it all. Victoria called an emergency resident meeting. The board approved all renovation plans. Construction starts next week. The basement would become a community center. Charles's old apartment transformed into a gathering space. Upper floors modernized with proper security. Sarah's evidence helped convict 20 executives. Eleanor updated them. More arrests coming. Emily worked with federal investigators, using her grandfather's notes to trace financial crimes. The theorem itself remained sealed by court order. You should see this, Michael showed Charles a news alert. Robert faced life in prison. His father's body had been found in Cyprus, apparent suicide. Charles felt no satisfaction, only relief. What about James? Witness protection, Gerald said, after the trials. The brothers had reconciled during their hospital stay. James's testimony would ensure Genesis's complete dismantling. Eleanor touched Charles's arm. The resident board meeting starts soon. They gathered in the renovated lobby. Victoria presented the final plans for Pinewood Gardens' new chapter. A community trust, she explained, protected forever. No corporation can touch it. Charles watched his neighbors, now family, approve the measures unanimously. Sarah's final victory, a home preserved, a community strengthened. There's more, Eleanor stood. We're establishing the Sarah Sullivan Truth Fund. The foundation would support whistleblowers, protect elderly residents, fight corporate fraud. Sarah's work continuing through others. Charles's chest tightened, but not from pain. Michael gripped his shoulder. Emily showed her grandfather's approving smile. Eleanor's hand found his. Through Pinewood Gardens' windows, the setting sun painted their future in shades of hope. The Pinewood Gardens Community Center opened on a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after the Genesis trials concluded. Charles stood at the entrance, his heart strong and steady, watching residents gather for the dedication ceremony. Sarah Sullivan Memorial Hall. Eleanor read the bronze plaque, her hand intertwined with Charles's. She would have loved this. The transformation was remarkable. The once sterile basement now housed a warm, welcoming space where residents could gather, share stories, and build the community Sarah had fought to protect. Natural light streamed through newly installed windows, illuminating walls covered in photos chronicling Pinewood Gardens' history. Emily approached with the first group of scholarship recipients, young students who would receive funding for mathematics and ethics studies through the Sarah Sullivan Truth Fund. Gerald beamed with pride from his wheelchair as his granddaughter introduced each aspiring scholar. "The next generation of guardians," he said softly. Victoria, now elected head of the resident board, began the ceremony. "Today we honor not just a building's renewal, but the triumph of truth over corruption, community over corporate greed." Michael stood beside his father, their relationship rebuilt through shared purpose. He'd taken charge of the foundation's legal team, ensuring Sarah's legacy would protect others facing similar battles. "Mom would be proud," he whispered, "of all of us." Peggy's security team maintained a discreet presence. Though Genesis was destroyed, its ripples still spread through financial markets worldwide. The residents' safety remained a priority. "James sent this." Eleanor handed Charles an envelope during the reception. Inside he found a photograph. Sarah and Helen Harrison at a university event decades ago, both women smiling with the unshakable determination that would ultimately expose Genesis's crimes. They knew, Charles realized. Even then, they were planning to fight back. The ceremony continued with Gerald announcing the Harrison Sullivan Prize for Ethical Innovation. "Mathematics should serve humanity," he declared, "not control it." Emily presented her modified version of the theorem, stripped of its predictive powers, but retaining its ability to detect financial fraud. "Open source," she explained, "available to regulators worldwide. No more hidden corruption." Charles watched Eleanor coordinate with renovation crews. The building's upper floors were being converted into affordable housing for seniors, protected forever by the community trust. Sarah's vision expanding beyond what any of them had imagined. Victoria called him to the podium. "Charles Sullivan," she announced, "our head of resident services and guardian of truth." He approached slowly, touching the scar on his chest, a reminder of battles fought and won. The assembled residents applauded, but he raised his hand for quiet. "Sarah believed in this community," he began. "Not just the building, but the people. She saw what we could be when we chose truth over comfort, justice over profit, love over fear." His eyes met Eleanor's. They would marry in the spring, beginning a new chapter while honoring the past. "Genesis thought they could control the future through algorithms and corruption," Charles continued. "But they forgot about human hearts, human courage, human love." Michael stood with Emily and Gerald, their unlikely family forged through crisis and redemption. Peggy nodded approval from her security post. Victoria smiled, remembering her own journey from complicity to conviction. "This center," Charles gestured around them, "is more than a memorial. It's a promise. To protect each other, to fight for truth, to build something lasting from the ashes of deception." The residents rose in standing ovation. Charles saw tears in many eyes, felt them in his own. Through the windows, autumn leaves danced in the sunlight, nature's reminder that endings brought new beginnings. Later, alone in Sarah's old office, now a counseling center for whistleblowers, Charles found a final note she'd hidden years ago. "My love, if you're reading this, you've done what I couldn't. You've turned darkness into light, fear into hope. The building stands, the truth lives, and love endures. That's the greatest legacy of all." He touched the note gently, then placed it in the community archive. Sarah's words would inspire others, just as she'd inspired them. Outside, Eleanor waited. Together, they walked through their transformed home, guardians of a legacy built on sacrifice, redeemed through courage, and sustained by love. The future stretched before them, not predicted by algorithms, but shaped by human hearts choosing truth. Charles and Eleanor's wedding took place in Pinewood Gardens, new community center. The ceremony reflected their shared commitment to both family and community service. Michael served as best man, marking the complete restoration of their father-son relationship. The resident board members filled the front rows, with Gerald and Emily in place of honor. "The rings," the officiant requested. Michael presented them, simple bands inscribed with Sarah's favorite quote, "Truth endures." After the ceremony, Emily unveiled the first graduating class of the Sullivan Scholarship Program. 10 students had completed their ethics and mathematics training, ready to implement financial oversight systems based on her modified theorem. "Each graduate has already secured positions with regulatory agencies," she announced. "The changes we fought for are becoming institutional." Gerald, watching from his usual spot near the window, nodded in approval. His health had stabilized, allowing him to mentor the scholarship recipients in advanced mathematics and ethical applications. Victoria presented her quarterly report during the reception. The resident trust had expanded to 3 additional buildings, providing protected housing for seniors across the city. The Sarah Sullivan Truth Fund supported the acquisitions, ensuring corporate developers couldn't exploit vulnerable residents. "The model is spreading," Victoria explained. "Other cities are requesting our framework." Peggy, who continued to oversee security, confirmed that all Genesis threats had been neutralized. The last appeals had failed, and Robert would spend life in prison. His network of corporate conspirators faced similar sentences. "James sent this." Peggy handed Charles a secure message. From witness protection, his testimony had helped convict 30 more executives. The financial industry's cleanup continued, driven by Emily's fraud detection systems. The wedding celebration transformed into a community gathering. Residents shared stories of rebuilding, of finding purpose in protecting others from corporate exploitation. The Sarah Sullivan Memorial Hall had become a hub for whistleblower support and corporate accountability training. Michael outlined the foundation's expanded legal services. "We've helped 20 whistleblowers this quarter alone. Each case exposes new attempts at financial corruption." Eleanor, now heading the resident advocacy program, described their growing network of protected senior communities. "The Genesis pattern of elder exploitation ended here, but the fight continues elsewhere." Charles listened to their reports, recognizing how their individual missions had aligned into a larger purpose. The building once targeted for destruction had become a fortress protecting truth and justice. The scholarship graduates presented their projects, new algorithms designed to detect and prevent financial fraud. Emily's guidance had helped them strip prediction capabilities from Gerald's theorem while enhancing its protective functions. "Technology should guard human dignity," she reminded them, "not control human destiny." Victoria announced the completion of building renovations. The upper floors provided affordable housing for seniors, while the lower levels housed support services and community spaces. The Sarah Sullivan Truth Fund ensured permanent protection from corporate takeovers. Gerald shared news from academic circles. Universities had incorporated ethics requirements into mathematics and finance programs, sparked by the Genesis revelations. His brother James, though in witness protection, contributed to curriculum development remotely. The day ended with a resident board meeting. Charles and Eleanor, now married, reviewed plans for expanding their protection model nationally. The Sullivan-Harrison approach to corporate accountability had gained federal attention. "Sarah's work continues," Charles told the board. "Through all of us." Michael presented statistics proving their impact. Fraud exposed, seniors protected, whistleblowers supported. The numbers validated their approach to systemic change. Eleanor outlined next quarter's goals: 3 more buildings, expanded legal services, new scholarship programs. The Genesis tragedy had sparked a movement larger than anyone expected. Emily's fraud detection network had identified similar schemes in other cities. Peggy's security teams trained local advocates to protect vulnerable residents. Victoria's management model became a template for ethical senior housing. The Sarah Sullivan Truth Fund, strengthened by recovered Genesis assets, funded it all. Charles and Eleanor's wedding marked not just their personal union, but the joining of multiple missions into a unified force for accountability and protection. As night fell, Charles looked at their growing family, biological and chosen, knowing they'd built something lasting from tragedy. Sarah's final message had predicted this. Truth endured, Love survived, and justice prevailed. The future stretched ahead, shaped not by corporate algorithms, but by human hearts choosing right over easy, truth over profit, and love over fear. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Charles's position? Do you know someone who fought for truth like Sarah? Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about courage, justice, and the triumph of the human spirit. Remember, truth doesn't ask for permission to change the world. It only needs someone brave enough to speak it.